They laughed when I told them the lake was dying. They said I was paranoid, that I'd spent too long tinkering with my old engineer gadgets. But I knew what I saw. The water was vanishing inch by inch, like someone pulling the plug on our entire community. Lake Marigold wasn't just scenery. It was the heart of Cedar Crest, the mirror of our lives. And now it was bleeding out because someone in power thought optimization sounded better than destruction. I warned the HOA president, Hannah Wright. I showed her the data, the photos, even the flow readings. She smirked, said, "Relax, Mr. Perez, it's just nature doing its thing." 3 weeks later, the fish were dead, the air stank, and the lake was nothing but cracked mud and lies. Before we dive into the full story, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next turned our peaceful neighborhood into a courtroom. Battlefield. The first time I noticed something was wrong, the air felt heavier, like the lake itself was holding its breath. It was early April, one of those crisp mornings when the mist curls low over the surface, and every sound carries farther than it should. My dog Scout froze mid-step and started growling toward the shoreline. When I followed his gaze, my stomach tightened. The waterline had receded not a little, but by nearly 3 feet. I'd lived here for 15 years, long enough to know the rhythm of Lake Marigold. I'd seen it shimmer gold in the summer and turn to glass in winter. But this was different. The rocks that were once underwater now glistened with mud, and the smell of wet earth was thick, almost sour. The lake wasn't retreating naturally, it was being drained. My name's Ryan Perez, and before retiring, I spent 2 decades managing dams and reservoirs for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I've seen rivers, flood villages, lakes poisoned by shortcuts, and bureaucrats who thought spreadsheets could outsmart the land. But I never thought I'd see that same arrogance right here, in a quiet HOA community that was supposed to be my peace after a lifetime of pressure. Cedar Crest was supposed to be a sanctuary. Neat lawns, tidy mailboxes, an HOA that mostly kept to itself. Back then, the president was an old-timer named George McAllen, a man who cared more about fishing than fines. But when he moved away 2 years ago, the board changed hands. The new president, Hannah Wright, was nothing like him. She was young, ambitious, and obsessed with modernizing everything: smart gates, digital permits, surveillance drones, even an app to report neighbor violations. She called it efficiency. The rest of us called it micromanagement with Wi-Fi. That morning, as Scout and I circled the trail, I stopped near the southern bank, the area behind the new beautification zone Hannah had been bragging about at the last meeting. That's when I saw it, a steel pipe 6 inches wide jutting out from the soil like a bone sticking through flesh. The welds were fresh, still shiny. Muddy boot prints trailed from it toward the service road. The pipe pointed away from the lake toward the drainage gully that ran behind the new construction plots. Someone had installed it recently, and whoever did it wasn't subtle. I crouched down, pressed my palm against the exposed soil. Still damp, still settling. I could feel a faint vibration, the hum of running water. I pulled out my old handheld flow reader from my backpack. It was a relic from my field days, but it worked. The reading flickered 15 gallons per minute. That might not sound like much, but over a week, that's more than 1,500,000 gallons of water gone. I took photos, angles, timestamps, coordinates. The sun climbed higher, throwing sharp reflections off the receding surface. Scout barked once, impatient. "Yeah," I muttered, "I'm not liking this either, buddy." Back home, I dug through my old files charts I'd kept from when George once asked me to assess minor seepage issues. I compared historical levels. The drop we'd just seen was 10 times faster than any natural fluctuation recorded in the last decade. No drought, no dam release, just human interference. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the small cedar bench I'd built years ago right by the dock. The moonlight painted the surface in silver streaks. I remembered sitting there with my wife before her illness, her laughter echoing over the water. I remembered teaching my son to fish there before he moved west. That bench wasn't just wood, it was memory. And now, that same bench sat 2 feet above the waterline. By dawn, my decision was made. I was taking it to the HOA. The next morning, I walked into the Cedar Crest community office, a beige box of a building squeezed between the clubhouse and the tennis courts. The new HOA manager, Lydia Park, barely looked up from her screen. "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Perez?" she asked, in that rehearsed customer service tone. "No," I said, setting my folder on the counter. "But I have an emergency." 5 minutes later, she ushered me into the small conference room, the one that smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee. 3 board members sat around the table: Hannah Wright, her ever-smirking vice president Alan Pike, and treasurer Marjorie Finn, who looked like she'd stepped out of a real estate brochure. Hannah gave me that practiced smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "Morning, Ryan. What's so urgent?" I spread out my photos, charts, and a printed map of the lake. "Someone installed an unauthorized drainage pipe on the south bank," I said calmly. "It's diverting water out of Lake Marigold into the lower gully. The lake's already dropped over 3 feet in the past week." Alan leaned back, arms crossed. "And how exactly do you know that?" "Because I measured it. And because I spent 20 years managing lakes twice this size." Hannah gave a soft laugh. "You think we're siphoning off the lake, Mr. Perez? Come on. This isn't some conspiracy thriller." I met her gaze. "I'm saying you have an unpermitted pipe that's bleeding our lake dry. And if it's HOA sanctioned, you're violating both county watershed regulations and the community's environmental covenant." That wiped the smirk off Alan's face. Marjorie shifted in her seat, glancing toward Hannah. The silence hung thick for a beat before Hannah leaned forward, elbows on the table. "We'll look into it," she said curtly. "Thank you for your enthusiasm." "I'll expect an update by Friday," I said, gathering my papers. As I stood, Hannah added with a sugary tone, "You know, Ryan, maybe you should spend less time worrying about the lake and more time enjoying retirement. It's easy to see problems when you're looking for them." I didn't respond. I just left the folder on the table on purpose. Let them read it. Let them squirm. That evening I walked the shoreline again. The moonlight glinted off the shrinking surface, reflecting the dock like a skeleton over bones. The frogs were silent now. Scout paced beside me, restless. I knelt by the mud and pressed my hand into it. Still wet, but not for long. I'd seen this kind of arrogance before in war zones, in reconstruction sites, in boardrooms, where people thought they could manage nature the way they managed profit margins. They always learned the same lesson: too late, water has a memory, and it doesn't forgive. The next week, the HOA sent out their glossy digital newsletter. Right under a cheerful photo of Hannah standing beside freshly trimmed hedges was a headline that made my blood run cold. "Water Optimization Project, Phase 1 Complete. Cedar Crest HOA successfully improves drainage and erosion control around Lake Marigold. Residents can expect better mosquito control and reduced flooding risks." I stared at the screen. Improved drainage. That was their excuse. I scrolled farther. Phase 2 to begin early May. They weren't fixing the lake, they were gutting it. The following afternoon I took Scout for another walk. Along the southern trail I spotted 3 workers in neon vests, staking flags into the dirt. A small backhoe idled beside them. One man waved politely. I didn't wave back. By the time I returned home, I knew this wasn't going to end with polite meetings or newsletters. This was war quiet, bureaucratic, polite on the surface, but war all the same. And if the HOA wanted to drain the heart out of this community, they'd have to go through me first. If there's one thing I've learned in my life, it's that arrogance wears perfume and smiles. That's exactly what I smelled when I walked back into the HOA office 3 days later: lavender air freshener and self-importance. The meeting wasn't on the schedule, but Lydia, the office manager, made a show of pretending to check her calendar before sighing. "You're lucky, Mr. Perez. The board's already here for the budget review. I'll see if they can spare a minute." She didn't mean spare a minute. She meant give you enough rope to hang yourself. When she finally opened the conference room door, I stepped into a scene that could have come straight from a corporate parody. Hannah Wright sat at the head of the table, tablet glowing in front of her, manicured nails clicking on the glass. To her right, Alan Pike scrolled through his phone like a teenager, and on her left, Marjorie Finn was reviewing color samples for mailbox paint. Priorities. "Ryan," Hannah exclaimed, syrupy sweet. "We were just talking about landscaping. What brings you in today?" "The lake," I said flatly. "Again." Alan groaned under his breath. Hannah gestured toward the empty chair. "Sit. Educate us." I opened my folder and slid a photo across the table, the new drainage pipe glinting in the sunday. This was installed without permit, without resident vote, and without any engineering oversight. It's bleeding Lake Marigold into the southern gully at about 15 gallons per minute. That's roughly 150,000 gallons a week. Marjorie frowned. "That seems exaggerated." "It isn't," I said. "Here's the data log from my pressure sensors. Here's the GPS flow rate." Alan leaned back, folding his arms. "You're saying we did this on purpose. I'm saying somebody did," I replied. "And if that somebody was acting under HOA authorization, you've broken county watershed regulations and Section 4 of our own covenants, the clause protecting shared natural resources." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Hannah chuckled. It wasn't loud, just that smug little exhale people use when they think they're smarter than you. Ryan, I appreciate your passion, but this community's infrastructure is decades old. We had to install a new outlet to prevent overflow during storm season. It's a safety measure. You should be thanking us. Safety measure? I echoed. We haven't had a flood here since 2011, and that was because of a hurricane. You're draining the lake during dry season. Exactly, Alan said. Preventive maintenance. I felt my pulse rise, but I kept my tone steady. Preventive maintenance doesn't lower water levels by 3 feet in 10 days. It doesn't require trench digging, pipe welding, or soil removal. That's modification. And under our bylaws, modification requires a vote. Marjorie rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. You really think we need 80% of homeowners to approve every time we clean a ditch, when that ditch is connected to a shared lake? Yes. The room went quiet again. Then Hannah smiled wider, the kind of smile that meant the conversation was over in her mind. Thank you, Mr. Perez. We'll review your materials and consult with our environmental partner. Who's your environmental partner? She clicked her tablet and read a name. Evergreen Outdoors, LLC. They handle sustainable landscaping and erosion control for several communities in the region. I'd never heard of them. Are they licensed environmental engineers, licensed landscapers? She corrected. They're very reputable. Reputable at mowing lawns, I muttered. Alan smirked. You always this cheerful, Ryan. I stood. You'll be hearing from me again. As I left, Hannah's voice followed me, smooth and dismissive. Oh, we're sure of that. The next morning, the HOA newsletter hit everyone's inboxes. Headline in cheerful blue letters, Water Optimization Project. Phase 1 complete. Cedar Crest HOA has successfully improved drainage and erosion control along Lake Marigold's southern shore. Residents can expect better mosquito mitigation and reduced flooding risks. I nearly dropped my coffee. Water optimization. That was the phrase she'd used to disguise environmental vandalism. Underneath the announcement was a smiling photo of Hannah cutting a bright green ribbon beside a shiny evergreen truck. By noon, half the community had seen it. Some commented, "Great job," on the HOA forum. Others shrugged it off. Only a handful messaged me privately asking what was really going on. That afternoon, I walked the trail again. The southern bank was crawling with workers in neon vests, hammering stakes into the dirt, marking new trenches. A small excavator idled nearby. One of the men waved. "Morning, sir." Careful near the slope, soft ground. I didn't respond. I just took photos. The water line had dropped another 6 inches since yesterday. Back home, I pulled out my binder of documents, the covenants, county ordinances, soil maps. Scout watched from the couch as I circled the relevant clauses in red marker. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Any alteration to natural water bodies within community property shall require 80% approval of homeowners at a public hearing. There had been no hearing, no notice. Just Hannah's press release and her fake ribbon-cutting smile. So that night I drafted a letter. No threats, no anger, just facts. I enclosed printed copies of my measurements, satellite imagery showing the shrinking shoreline and the covenant clause. I sealed it in an envelope marked "For HOA Board, Urgent Environmental Concern," and dropped it in the office mailbox before dawn. When the next HOA meeting came around a week later, I made sure to arrive early. The clubhouse smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Folding chairs lined the walls, and the air conditioner rattled above us like an old train. As residents filed in, I noticed the mix: retirees clutching printed newsletters, young couples with strollers, and a few people who looked like they were there just for the free donuts. Hannah called the meeting to order. Tonight's agenda: budget updates, security patrol scheduling, and maintenance updates. When the floor opened for resident comments, I stood. I'd like to speak on the so-called water optimization project. Her smile faltered. Mr. Perez, I have Article 4 of our HOA covenant right here, I said, holding up the folder. It requires a community vote before altering any shared natural resource. There was no vote. There was no notice. Therefore, this project violates our own governing rules. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "Is that true?" Another voice answered, "I never got a ballot." Hannah cleared her throat. The board determined the project qualifies as routine maintenance, which doesn't require a vote. Routine maintenance doesn't involve excavators, trenching, or water flow redirection, I said. That's not maintenance, that's engineering, and bad engineering at that. Alan leaned toward his mic. Mr. Perez, you're bordering on hostility. I'm bordering on concern, I said. But if you want hostility, keep ignoring the facts. The audience chuckled softly. Hannah's smile tightened. We consulted professionals. Landscapers, I corrected. Not hydrologists. That got a few laughs from the back row. Hannah's tone sharpened. If you continue to disrupt our meetings, Mr. Perez, the board will issue a behavioral violation. There it was, the threat. The crowd quieted. I looked her straight in the eye. File whatever you like. But the lake doesn't belong to you, Hannah. It belongs to all of us. I sat down. The silence that followed wasn't approval, not yet, but it wasn't dismissal either. I saw something shift in people's faces. Doubt, curiosity, a seed. 2 days later, I received a certified envelope from the HOA. Inside violation notice, disruptive conduct. Fine $250. Scout barked once, as if reading my mind. I laughed bitterly. They think fines are going to shut me up. That night, I poured myself a drink, sat on the porch, and watched the moon rise over the shrinking water. The frogs were gone. The air smelled faintly of decay. I'd faced bureaucrats with bigger titles than Hannah Wright. I'd testified before congressional subcommittees. If she wanted a paperwork war, she'd picked the wrong veteran to provoke. I opened a new file on my laptop, Cedar Crest, Lake Marigold case. Inside, I created folders labeled photos, measurements, covenants, county law witness statements. If they wanted to laugh, fine. I'd let them laugh right up until the evidence drowned them. You can tell a lot about a person by the way they handle power. Some use it to lead, others use it to silence. Hannah Wright, she weaponized it like a pro. 2 days after that meeting, I woke to find a bright orange envelope taped to my front door. HOA, notice of violation, unapproved distribution of materials. The charge? Spreading misinformation and soliciting neighbor involvement without board consent. I actually laughed out loud. They'd fined me $250 for talking. Scout barked once, tail low. Yeah, buddy, I muttered. They're trying to muzzle us both. But I wasn't about to pay a dime. I dealt with bureaucratic intimidation before, and I knew exactly how to answer it with paper precision and persistence. I filed an appeal that afternoon. Not through email, through certified mail, with time-stamped copies of everything. Inside the envelope, I included 3 things. A copy of the HOA covenant clause requiring public approval for environmental changes, high-resolution satellite photos showing the lake's receding shoreline, and a flow rate chart from my homemade water sensor that logged the loss hour by hour. The next day, Lydia from the office called. "Mr. Perez, we received your appeal." "I'm sure you did," I said. She hesitated. "The board will review it at their next meeting. That's 3 weeks from now." "The lake won't last 3 weeks," I said. Her tone changed, icy and distant. "Are you threatening the HOA?" "Mr. Perez," I laughed softly. "No, Lydia, I'm warning you." She hung up. That weekend, I began to notice something else. The neighborhood itself was changing. Conversations that used to start with nice weather now started with what's wrong with the lake. Parents stopped letting their kids play by the water. The air smelled faintly of algae and something else decay. I decided it was time to go public. Not online, the HOA monitored the neighborhood Facebook page like hawks. No, I went old school. I wrote a calm, factual email to every resident using the HOA's own mailing list, which thanks to an old PDF attachment wasn't exactly secure. The subject line read, "Lake Marigold, facts you should know." I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I laid out the data water loss of over 3 feet in 2 weeks, the existence of an unauthorized drainage pipe, the lack of a community vote. I quoted the exact covenant line they were violating. I even listed my credentials, 20 years of experience in hydrology and environmental infrastructure management. Within an hour, the replies started trickling in. Didn't realize it dropped that much. Thanks for sharing. Thought it was just dry season. We're seeing dead frogs near our backyard creek. Could that be related? Then came the real one. My kids used to fish off the dock, but now there's nothing left but mud. Keep fighting, Mr. Perez. That one was from Dana Brooks, my late wife's best friend. She'd lived 2 streets over since before the HOA even existed. Dana wasn't the kind of woman who got involved in drama, but when she did, people listened. The next morning, my bench by the lake was vandalized. Someone had spray-painted 2 words across the backrest in sloppy red letters, Lake Liar. I just stood there staring at it. Scout growled softly beside me. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, though. My jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. Later that day, another envelope appeared on my door, this time yellow. Violation Level 2, repeated behavioral misconduct. Additional fine, $250. They were escalating. I didn't pay. Instead, I documented everything, dates, letters, photos, timestamps, and filed another appeal. This time I added a paragraph. Any further harassment or false citations will be reported to county enforcement under HOA abuse statutes. I wasn't bluffing. In my time with the Corps, I'd helped write parts of those very statutes. Meanwhile, the water kept falling. Tadpoles were trapped in puddles the size of footprints. Algae coated the stones like green scabs. The lake smelled like rot. That's when the whisper network began. An elderly couple, the Crawfords, stopped me one morning as I walked scout. "We read your email," Mrs. Crawford said quietly. "You're right. Our doctor says the air's triggering our daughter's asthma again. Never happened before." A few houses down, a young father named Jorge Ramirez waved me over. "My car got towed last week. They said it was non-operational. It just needed a new battery. Cost me $1,000. They're out of control." I nodded. "It's all connected, Jorge. They're abusing power because no one's stopping them." He looked at the dried mud behind me and said, "Maybe it's time someone did." By the end of the week, I'd collected over a dozen stories, all different, all with the same root Hannah Wright's board, using violations to punish dissent and profit off fines. I started keeping a spreadsheet. Patterns emerged. The same 10 names showed up in every enforcement notice. Guess who was near the bottom? Mine. A few nights later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Ryan, it's Dana." Her voice was hushed. "Hannah came to my door today. Said you're spreading dangerous misinformation. She told me not to associate with you." I sighed. "Let me guess." She smiled while saying it. "Like a politician. But people aren't buying it. You've got supporters, even if they're scared to speak up." That meant more to me than she probably realized. "Thanks, Dana." "Be careful," she said softly. "She's not just defending pride anymore. She's defending whatever she's hiding." The next morning, I found 2 men in reflective vests, hammering a sign into my front lawn. "Notice pending violation. Unmaintained, perimeter edging." I walked out, barefoot, coffee mug in hand. "You serious?" They wouldn't meet my eyes. One mumbled, "Just following orders," before retreating. My lawn was perfect, fresh mulch, trimmed hedges, edges straighter than a ruler. This wasn't enforcement. It was retaliation. That afternoon, I got another letter, 3 combined fines totaling $750 for unauthorized landscaping, disruptive behavior, and unsanctioned communication. They thought they could bury me under paper. But every piece of paper they sent was another bullet for my evidence file. That night, I sat at my desk, lit only by the lamp's yellow glow, surrounded by folders and photos. Scout lay nearby, occasionally lifting his head when I muttered under my breath. "Behavioral misconduct, my ass," I said, scribbling notes. "They're breaking the law, and I'm the one being fined." I opened a new folder labeled Community Testimonies and began writing summaries of every resident who'd spoken to me. Each one included date, address, complaint, and signature. If they wanted a paper war, I'd give them a damn hurricane of paperwork. The next HOA newsletter arrived the following Monday. Headline: Rumors and Realities, Setting the Record Straight. Recent claims about Lake Marigold's water levels are exaggerated and misleading. The board is confident in our sustainable practices. Residents are encouraged to disregard unverified data from non-official sources. Non-official sources. That was me. They'd turned me into the villain of their little fiefdom. But something unexpected happened. The more they tried to discredit me, the more people started paying attention. I'd walk scout around the neighborhood and strangers would nod at me, subtle, nervous, but supportive. One afternoon, a teenager yelled from across the street, "Hey, Mr. Perez, my dad says you're right about the lake." I smiled. "Tell your dad thanks for keeping an open mind." Even Hannah's allies were starting to waver. People wanted answers. And then came the real crack in her armor: the smell. By mid-April, the stench from the lake grew unbearable. Algae bloomed across the surface like green oil slicks. Dead fish washed up near the docks. Parents complained. Runners changed their routes. The HOA could spin optimization all it wanted, but you can't rebrand rot. I received an email from Maya Chen, the local blogger who covered community issues. "Mr. Perez, residents mentioned you have documentation about the drainage issue. I'm looking into a story. Would you be willing to comment?" I stared at the message for a long time. This wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. It was about to become public. I typed back one line: "Meet me at the South Bank tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring your camera." When I arrived the next morning, Maya was already there, snapping photos of the dried mudflats where water used to be. The sun was high, the smell sharp and foul. "This used to be the deep end," she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Now it's a graveyard." She lowered her camera. "You really think the HOA's behind this?" "I don't think," I said. "I know. And soon they'll know that I know." She smiled slightly. That's a good quote. Make sure you spell my name right, I said. She did. And when her article went live 2 days later, What's Happening to Lake Marigold, the story exploded across every group chat and inbox in Cedar Crest. For the first time, Hannah Wright wasn't in control of the narrative. And for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. The article hit Cedar Crest like a lightning strike. One day, everyone was politely ignoring me. The next, my name was being whispered in every mailbox cluster, coffee shop, and Facebook thread in town. The headline read, What's Happening to Lake Marigold? Residents report rapid water loss, foul odor, and ecological decline after HOA's water optimization project. Maya Chen didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The photos said it all cracked mud, where the lake should have been a dead fish, bloated under a brittle film of algae, and in the background, the glimmer of that cursed pipe jutting from the bank like a gun aimed at the water itself. Within 24 hours, the HOA sent out their rebuttal official statement from the board of directors. Recent media coverage has misrepresented our ongoing environmental improvements. The HOA's goal is to ensure sustainability and mosquito mitigation, not to harm the ecosystem. Any visible water fluctuation is due to seasonal variation and regional drought conditions. Regional drought. We'd had 3 inches of rain that week alone. They weren't even trying to make it believable anymore. The next morning, I walked Scout along the lake trail again. The once clear water was a milky green, now foamy and still. A layer of dead insects floated near the shore. The smell had turned sharp, almost chemical. I bent down, scooped a sample into a jar, and sealed it tight. Halfway through the loop, I ran into Dana Brooks holding a trash bag and a litter grabber. Morning, she said, though. Her voice was low. You see the fish? Yeah, I replied. It's getting worse. She nodded, looking toward the surface. You think they'll fix it? I gave a dry laugh. They'd have to admit they broke it first. Dana's expression hardened. Then we'll make them. That afternoon, a white pickup truck rolled into the cul-de-sac, bright green letters on the side, Evergreen Outdoors, LLC. Out stepped 3 men in reflective vests, clipboards in hand, laughing like they were early to a barbecue. One of them spotted me watching and waved. You're the lake guy, right? He shouted. Depends who's asking, I called back. Name's Travis, he said. We're here for the Phase 2 assessment. Hannah wants us to widen the south trench and reinforce the bank. Reinforce, I asked. You mean destroy what's left? Travis shrugged. Just following orders, man. I studied him. No environmental testing gear, no water quality probes, not even waders. Just landscaping gloves and a gas trimmer in the truck bed. You got a hydrology permit for this work? I asked. He blinked. A what? Never mind. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of his truck's license plate. Hey, you can't. It's public property. I cut him off. You're standing on community land. They left 15 minutes later, probably after calling Hannah to report my interference. By the end of the week, the fish kill had gone from scattered bodies to full-blown disaster. Dozens of carcasses washed up on the north shore, silvery and swollen. The HOA's response: hire a crew of teenagers to scoop them into black garbage bags under the banner of a lake cleanup initiative. I stood there watching as the kids worked under the afternoon sun, gagging through masks, gagging as they loaded the bags into a pickup. A photographer I didn't recognize snapped pictures from across the trail. When I looked closer, I saw the words on his camera strap, Mid-County Gazette. Good, I thought. Let them all see it. Later that night, the story hit the local paper, Dead Fish and Questions at Cedar Crest Lake. Residents report worsening conditions following HOA water project. The HOA tried to claim the photo was out of context. But you can't spin death. That weekend, I decided to dig deeper, literally. Armed with a small soil auger and a portable oxygen meter, I hiked to the southern trench at dawn before the workers arrived. The air was thick with humidity and decay. I drove the auger into the exposed mud and twisted. When I pulled it out, the core smelled like sulfur. Black oxygen-starved silt, anaerobic. The oxygen meter confirmed it, 0 dissolved oxygen. The lake bed was suffocating. Then I noticed something worse. Around the drainage pipe, the soil was discolored orange streaks, like rust and chemical residue. I touched it with a gloved finger, and the smell of fuel hit me. Evergreen's machines were leaking hydraulic fluid straight into the runoff channel. I took photos, sealed samples, and labeled everything. Evidence. On Monday morning, I sent an email to the County Environmental Office with the subject line, Potential Chemical Contamination at Lake Marigold. I attached photos, coordinates, and sample readings. 2 days later, I got a call. Mr. Perez, this is Rowan Lee, field investigator with the State Department of Environmental Protection. We received your report. I'll be conducting a preliminary inspection this week. I nearly dropped the phone. You mean the state's actually looking into it? Yes, sir, she said. Your documentation was thorough. Very thorough. For the first time in months, I felt a pulse of hope. That hope lasted exactly one day. Because the next morning I received another HOA notice, this time taped right to my mailbox. Immediate cease and desist, Mr. Perez, you are hereby ordered to refrain from entering HOA-managed properties or interfering with ongoing maintenance operations. Failure to comply will result in legal escalation. Legal escalation, I repeated aloud, crumpling the paper. They're scared. Scout barked twice, as if in agreement. That night, Dana stopped by with a casserole comfort food for warriors, she joked. We ate on the porch while the frogs, what few were left, croaked weakly in the distance. You think that state investigator will do anything, she asked. She will, I said. If Hannah doesn't try to scare her off first. Dana smirked. Then maybe we should give Hannah a little scare of our own. What do you mean? She leaned in, conspiratorial. I've been digging too. My cousin works in real estate law, and guess who just filed paperwork for a development permit on the dry lot behind the lake? My heart skipped. Who? She handed me a printout. At the top, Lakeview Row, LLC. Listed managing partner Marjorie Finn, HOA treasurer. My blood ran cold. So this was never about drainage, I said slowly. They're drying the lake to build on it. Dana nodded. And they used HOA funds to do it. It was all starting to fit the fake optimization, the secrecy the fines meant to silence me. Hannah and her board weren't just reckless, they were profiteers. The next morning, Evergreen's crew didn't show up. Instead, a white state vehicle parked by the trail. A woman in field boots and a navy vest stepped out, clipboard in hand. I recognized the patch on her sleeve, State Dep, Field Operations, Rowan Lee. She didn't approach me, and I didn't approach her. I just watched from my porch as she walked the perimeter, jotting notes, photographing the drainage pipe, and collecting her own samples. An hour later, the HOA's email blast hit everyone's inboxes. Routine state. Visit residents may notice state officials on site today as part of standard inspection procedures. Following recent heavy rainfall. There is no cause for alarm. Heavy rainfall, we hadn't had more than a drizzle all week. By sunset, the smell of panic was thicker than the algae. 2 days later, Maya's next article dropped. This time it wasn't a blog post, it was front-page news. State investigation underway at Cedar Crest HOA. Officials respond to reports of unauthorized drainage and potential contamination. Photos showed Rowan kneeling near the drainage pipe, measuring instruments in hand, while Hannah stood 10 feet behind her arms, crossed lips tight. The HOA couldn't hide anymore. The story had gone statewide. That night my phone buzzed with messages from neighbors I barely knew. Thank you, you were right, we're with you. For the first time in months I slept soundly. The calm didn't last. By Friday morning, the HOA called an emergency community meeting. The email announcement dripped with manufactured humility. We understand there are concerns and we want to clear the air. I knew what that meant, they were going on the offensive. When I walked into the clubhouse, the room was packed, retirees, parents, teenagers hanging in the back. Even Rowan was there, quietly observing from the corner. Hannah took the podium, her pastel blazer practically glowing under the fluorescent lights. I want to address the rumors, she began smoothly. The HOA has done nothing illegal. We've followed all procedures to protect this community. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could feel the tension. She clicked a remote, and a slide appeared on the projector. Annual rainfall, Cedar County. As you can see, she continued, our region's rainfall has declined 12% in the past 5 years. Naturally, this affects lake levels. I raised my hand. That chart shows rainfall, not water volume. Do you have any hydrology data? Any volumetric readings since your project began? Her smile thinned. We rely on expert partners, Mr. Perez. Evergreen Outdoors is a landscaping company, I cut in. Not licensed engineers. A ripple of laughter spread across the room. Hannah's composure cracked just slightly, and then from the back, Dana's voice rang out. If you're so confident, Hannah, why did the state show up this week? That did it. The murmurs became voices. The voices became shouts. We want answers, someone yelled. You lied to us. Hannah tried to restore order, banging her gavel. This meeting is adjourned, but the damage was done. The crowd wasn't listening to her anymore. They were listening to me. And for the first time since this all began, I realized the HOA wasn't laughing anymore. That meeting changed everything. When Hannah slammed that gavel and stormed off stage, she didn't just lose her temper, she lost her grip on the narrative. The crowd's murmurs didn't fade. They spread like brush fire. For the first time, Cedar Crest's residents weren't whispering behind curtains. They were talking out loud. The next morning, the HOA Facebook group, normally sanitized by Hannah's moderators, was flooded with posts. What's going on with the lake? Why are we paying for this project? Who authorized the pipe? Every time a comment got deleted, 2 more appeared. Screenshots circulated faster than they could be scrubbed. By noon, my inbox was full. Anonymous messages. Some scared, some angry, some offering help. But one stood out. No name, no greeting, just a single line. You were right about the drainage. Check the attached file before they bury it. The attachment was a PDF titled Lakeview Row, Budget Summary, PDF. I hesitated. Malware, a trap. But curiosity won. When I opened it, my hands went cold. The document was an internal invoice from Evergreen Outdoors LLC dated 6 weeks earlier. Project name Lakeview Row Redevelopment, Dewatering and Soil Stabilization. The client listed wasn't the HOA. It was Lakeview Row LLC, and the signatory Marjorie Finn, HOA Treasurer. My eyes locked on one line in particular. Phase 1 controlled dewatering of Lake Marigold to prepare Southern Lot Foundation. No environmental permit required, per client direction. No permit, no oversight. Just greed. And now I knew the why. The lake wasn't being drained by accident. It was being drained to make room for real estate, a luxury row of townhomes Hannah and Marjorie planned to build on the newly exposed land. I printed everything and drove straight to the county offices. The clerk behind the counter, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked skeptical at first. But when I handed him the invoice, his brows lifted. This wasn't filed with us, he said slowly. They'd need a stormwater management permit for something like this. They didn't even apply, I asked. He shook his head. No record under that company name or address. You should take this to the state DEP, and fast. I already have, I said. They're investigating. Then it's about to get ugly. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Mr. Perez, this is Rowan Lee from the Department of Environmental Protection. I stepped out onto the porch, lowering my voice. I was just going to call you. I've reviewed your photos and the chemical samples, she said. They're consistent with mechanical runoff, hydraulic fluid, and iron oxidation. Definitely not natural causes. So it's confirmed, I said. They're killing the lake. Yes, she replied. But that's not all. We also found something in the county records, a zoning variance request from a company called Lakeview Row LLC. The address matches your HOA office. Hearing it spoken aloud hit me like a hammer. They're using HOA funds to prep land for private development. Looks that way, Rowan said. And if they diverted water without a permit, that's felony territory. My pulse pounded. What happens now? I'll be conducting a formal inspection with a state attorney next week, she said. You might want to prepare yourself. They'll come after you for this. They already have. Rowan's tone softened. Then keep every record, every email. We'll need it. The next few days felt like a waiting game, quiet, tense, deceptive. On the surface, Cedar Crest went on as usual. Sprinklers hissed, mail trucks hummed, kids biked along the empty sidewalks. But beneath it, something had shifted. Neighbors stopped crossing the street to avoid me. Some waved, some even brought coffee. Keep going, Ryan, one man whispered near the mailboxes. We've had enough of her. But Hannah wasn't retreating. Oh no, she was regrouping. A glossy flyer arrived in every mailbox, Rebuilding Trust in Cedar Crest. The HOA board, led by President Hannah Wright, remains committed to transparency and community progress. Don't let misinformation divide our neighborhood. On the back was a photo of Hannah standing in front of the lake, perfectly angled so you couldn't see the cracked mud just out of frame. At the bottom of the flyer, bold text read, "Report harassment or defamation to HOA legal counsel immediately." Translation: snitch on Perez. The following week, the state inspection began. 2 official vehicles rolled into the cul-de-sac at 9 a.m. sharp. Rowan stepped out, first clipboard in one hand, camera in the other. Beside her was a tall man in a suit with a state badge clipped to his belt. He introduced himself as Mark Delaney, environmental counsel for the state attorney's office. Residents peeked from windows and porches as they made their way to the southern bank. Hannah and Marjorie appeared moments later, heels clicking, fake smiles plastered on. "Good morning," Hannah chirped. "We're so glad the state could join us for our routine review." Rowan's expression didn't change. "This isn't routine, Miss Wright. We're here on a formal investigation." Marjorie's smile flickered. "Investigation? Oh, that must be a misunderstanding." "It's not," Mark interrupted, voice calm but firm. "We're looking into unauthorized water diversion and potential misuse of HOA funds." A murmur spread among the onlookers. Hannah's jaw tightened. "I assure you, everything we've done has been legal and approved." Rowan knelt by the drainage pipe, measuring the outflow. Then you won't mind showing us the permit. Silence. I watched from the trail as she took soil samples, snapped photos, and marked the trench with orange flags. She didn't say much, but her movements were methodical, practiced. I'd seen that kind of professionalism before, the kind that meant someone was already building a case. After nearly 2 hours, the inspectors packed up. Rowan walked over to me quietly. "I'll be in touch," she said. "And Mr. Perez, keep your head down." That night, Cedar Crest exploded. The HOA called an emergency session for members only, conveniently held during work hours, so most residents couldn't attend. But what they didn't know was that someone recorded it. The audio file surfaced the next morning, anonymously posted to the community forum. Hannah's voice, sharp and impatient. "We can't halt the project now. It'll cost us everything." Alan Pike. "But if the state finds out about the Lakeview funding Hannah, then we deny. They'll never trace it back. That pipe was Evergreen's mistake, not ours. Marjorie Yu signed the invoice, Hannah. And I'll make sure that paper disappears before they can find it." The recording spread like wildfire. Neighbors forwarded it, shared it, printed it. By lunch, it had reached Maya Chen, who published a follow-up article titled "Leaked HOA Meeting Audio Suggests Cover-Up in Lake Marigold Scandal." The comments section turned into a riot. "Resign now. We want an audit. No wonder the fish are dead." Even local TV picked it up. News vans parked by the entrance gate that evening. I stayed inside, curtains drawn. Not out of fear, out of exhaustion. It was strange. I'd fought wars, testified in courts, endured government bureaucracy. But this was the hardest battle yet, because it wasn't fought on battlefields or in courtrooms. It was fought on driveways and inboxes, in the eyes of neighbors deciding who to believe. That night Dana texted, "They're cracking. Keep steady." I typed back, "They'll come after me next. Let them. You've already won more ground than they realize." She was right. For the first time, I didn't feel like a man shouting into the void. I felt like part of something larger, a community remembering its own spine. 2 days later, the county sheriff's office delivered a notice of compliance violation to the HOA headquarters. The state seal was stamped right at the top: failure to secure environmental permits. Unauthorized alteration of a protected water resource. Pending investigation under state statute section 18-204. The fine print mentioned possible civil and criminal penalties. The next morning, Hannah's SUV was gone from her driveway. Rumor had it she'd taken a leave of absence. Marjorie was seen crying outside the clubhouse. Alan stopped answering emails entirely. For the first time in months, Lake Marigold was silent again, not the silence of death, but the silence before justice speaks. And as I stood on my porch watching the reflection of dawn shimmer faintly across what was left of the water, I realized something. They thought draining the lake would bury the truth, but instead it exposed everything they'd tried to hide. The subpoena came on a gray morning that smelled like rain fitting, I thought, for a fight that had started with water. The envelope bore the state seal heavy as judgment. Inside were 2 documents, a summons to appear as a technical witness, and a notice that the HOA of Cedar Crest, represented by President Hannah Wright, Treasurer Marjorie Finn, and Vice President Alan Pike, was being charged with unlawful environmental modification and misappropriation of community funds. When I finished reading, I just stood there, staring out across the misty lake. For the first time in months, I saw ripples, small, tentative, but there. The stormwater pumps had been shut down for weeks since the inspection, and nature patient as ever was taking back what belonged to her. Scout rested his head on my knee. "We're not done yet, buddy," I said quietly. "But maybe we're close." The hearing was scheduled in the Cedar County Courthouse, a squat sandstone building that smelled of polished wood and old paper. As I walked through the metal detector, a deputy nodded. "You're the lake guy, right?" I smiled faintly. "Guess that's me." He grinned. "Good luck in there. My folks live near Cedar Crest. They're rooting for you." That surprised me more than anything. This wasn't just a neighborhood feud anymore, it was a statewide spectacle. The Marigold case, they called it on the news. Inside the courtroom, rows of benches were already packed. Reporters, residents, camera crews, all packed, shoulder to shoulder. Hannah sat at the defense table in a Navy suit posture, perfect chin high. If you didn't know better, you'd think she was the victim. Beside her, Marjorie looked pale, wringing a tissue. Alan avoided everyone's eyes, his jaw tight. Their lawyer, a slick man in a silver tie named Clayton Ross, whispered something in Hannah's ear, and she nodded, flashing that same confident smile that once ruled the HOA meetings. But this wasn't the clubhouse. This was a courtroom. The judge, Honorable Linda Harrell, entered with the kind of calm that made everyone straighten their backs. This court is now in session. Case number 24 to 1187, State of Cedar, VA. Cedar Crest Homeowners Association. Rowan Lee, the DEP investigator, sat near the front with a stack of binders. When she caught my eye, she gave a subtle nod. The state attorney, Mark Delaney, opened with precision. Your Honor, this case isn't about a simple mistake or bureaucratic error. It's about deception, deliberate, sustained, and profitable. He clicked a remote, and the first slide appeared on the screen. An aerial photo of Lake Marigold half-drained its shoreline, cracked and pale. This, he said, is what happens when greed outweighs governance. He laid it out like a story: the unpermitted drainage pipe, the falsified invoices, the so-called water optimization project. Then he turned to the audience. And when one resident, Mr. Ryan Perez, began to ask questions, the HOA punished him for telling the truth. I hadn't expected that part. Hearing my name in open court, said with respect, felt strange, humbling, almost unreal. When the defense took over, Ross stood and adjusted his tie. Your Honor, the state's case rests on circumstantial interpretations and the opinions of a retired engineer. There is no proof my clients acted with intent to harm. The pipe in question was a necessary drainage upgrade, approved by consulting professionals. He gestured toward Hannah. Mrs. Wright has served her community tirelessly. To suggest she conspired to commit environmental crimes is absurd. Hannah put on her practiced sympathetic expression, the kind she'd used to charm residents into silence. But then came the evidence. Rowan approached the witness stand with quiet confidence, placing a folder on the table. This is Exhibit B12. The installation invoice from Evergreen Outdoors LLC, submitted to both the HOA and a private entity called Lakeview Row LLC. Notice the signature line. The projector lit up with the scanned document. Clear as day, no permit required per client direction. Signed H. Wright. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Ross jumped up. Objection. We don't have proof that this email wasn't forged. Rowan remained calm. The metadata confirms its origin from Mrs. Wright's HOA-issued account, time-stamped 3 days before construction began. The header information is intact and verifiable. The judge looked over her glasses. Objection overruled. Hannah's fingers twitched, but she didn't speak. Rowan continued flipping another page. Additionally, the company Lakeview Row LLC is registered under Treasurer Marjorie Finn, who also authorized HOA payments to Evergreen for the same project, effectively funneling community funds into a private development venture. Gasps spread through the audience. The judge turned to the defense. Mr. Ross, do your clients dispute these records? Ross hesitated. We reserve comment at this time. When it was my turn to testify, I stepped to the stand and took the oath. My hands didn't shake. Mr. Perez, Delaney began, can you explain what prompted your involvement? I noticed the water line dropping unnaturally fast, I said. When I investigated, I found an industrial outflow pipe draining the lake. As a retired water systems engineer, I recognized immediately it wasn't designed for natural drainage. And what happened when you reported this to the HOA? They ignored me. Then they fined me twice. Later, they labeled me a behavioral violator for asking questions. A quiet wave of outrage rippled through the room. Delaney showed the jury one of the HOA violation letters. This is the type of notice he received. Does this seem like proper procedure or retaliation? Ross objected, but the judge allowed it. Then came the kicker: the photo Maya had taken weeks ago projected on the courtroom wall. The one of dead fish, the lake turned green with algae. The silence that followed was suffocating. Delaney lowered his voice. Mr. Perez, in your expert opinion, could this ecological collapse have been avoided? Yes, I said. If they had followed procedure, filed permits, or listened when they were warned, none of this would have happened. Ross stood smiling tightly. Mr. Perez, isn't it true you have a personal grudge against Mrs. Wright? I met his gaze. No, counselor. I have a grudge against negligence. A low chuckle rippled through the crowd. Even the judge hid a small smile. The trial lasted 2 full days. Each new document, each witness painted the same picture: a board blinded by ambition, willing to gamble a community's trust for profit. Rowan's closing report sealed it. Her tone was cool, factual, deadly. In conclusion, the HOA of Cedar Crest authorized environmental alterations without state approval, diverted community funds to private development, and retaliated against residents who objected. The evidence demonstrates knowing and willful misconduct. When she finished, Hannah's once proud posture deflated. Marjorie stared at the table, tears staining her papers. Alan sat motionless, a statue of regret. Then Judge Harrell delivered her verdict. This court finds the defendants liable for violations under State Statute Section 18 to 204. The HOA is hereby fined $95,000 for unlawful drainage and environmental damage. Mrs. Hannah Wright and Mrs. Marjorie Finn are further held personally accountable for misappropriation of funds subject to restitution and removal from office effective immediately. A collective exhale swept through the room. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just sat there letting the words settle like rain on parched soil. As we filed out, Hannah brushed past me. For a second, her eyes met mine, still proud but cracked. "You think you won," she whispered. "You just destroyed your own community." "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped you from destroying it." Outside, the courthouse reporters swarmed. Microphones thrust toward my face, flashes popping. "Mr. Perez, what's next for Cedar Crest? Do you plan to run for the new board election? How does it feel to take down your own HOA president?" I raised a hand. "This was never about me. It's about accountability. We all live under these associations, and too often they forget who they serve. The lake didn't die because of nature, it died because of arrogance. And arrogance can't manage water." The cameras clicked. Somewhere behind them, Rowan watched, arms crossed, a faint smile on her lips. That evening, the community email thread lit up again, but this time not with outrage, with relief. "Thank you, Ryan. I was afraid to speak up, but you showed us how. Lake Marigold deserves better." The county announced plans to oversee restoration under DEP supervision. The pipe would be removed, the soil remediated, the lake refilled slowly over the coming months. When the announcement ended, I walked back to the dock. The sunset stretched across the half-drained water, glowing like liquid amber. For the first time in months, the air smelled clean again. Scout sat beside me, tail wagging lazily. "Looks like we might get our lake back," I whispered. He tilted his head, then barked once, sharp, certain. I smiled. "Yeah, I think so too." The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. And as the ripples lapped softly at the shore, I knew that justice, like water, always finds its level. For weeks after the verdict, Cedar Crest felt like a town after a long storm, quiet, raw, uncertain what to do with the sudden sunlight. The HOA office, once a fortress of control, stood locked and empty. The glossy posters about modernization and optimization had been stripped from the clubhouse windows, replaced with handwritten notes from neighbors. "Thank you, Ryan. Let the lake heal. We're taking it back." For the first time in years, I walked through the neighborhood without being glared at. People waved. Some even stopped me to talk. "Hey, Perez," said Jorge from Lot 12, the guy whose car had once been towed for having a dead battery. "You hear about the state grant?" I raised an eyebrow. "Grant," he grinned. "They're funding a full restoration shoreline, grading native plants, even a walking pier. State money, not HOA. I felt a lump form in my throat. "They're really doing it." "Yeah," he said. "And get this, they're asking for volunteers." The announcement came 2 days later. A new email, but this time not from an HOA address. The sender, Cedar County Department of Environmental Restoration. Community meeting, Lake Marigold Restoration Project. Saturday, 9:00 a.m., led by DEP investigator Rowan Lee and community stewardship volunteers. The words community stewardship hit me harder than I expected. For months, that word community had been twisted into something ugly used as a weapon by people like Hannah Wright. But now maybe it was coming home again. Saturday morning dawned bright and clean sunlight, catching on the dew-damp grass. When I arrived at the lakeside trail, the parking lot was already full. Dozens of residents milled about, retirees in sun hats, teenagers with gloves, parents holding cups of coffee while their kids ran ahead. Rowan stood at the edge of the crowd, clipboard in one hand, steel-toed boots planted firmly in the dirt. Her navy vest still bore the DEP insignia, but this time she wasn't here as an investigator. She was here as a leader. "Morning, everyone," she called out. Her voice carried across the breeze. "The state has approved Phase 1 of Lake Marigold's restoration. That means today we're removing the illegal drainage pipe, cleaning debris, and planting soil-stabilizing vegetation along the southern bank." A cheer went up. Someone clapped. She smiled faintly. "And before anyone asks, yes, this time it's permitted." Laughter rippled through the crowd. I stood near the back, shovel in hand. Scout trotted beside me, tail wagging. Dana appeared a moment later wearing a sun visor and carrying a cooler of lemonade. "Look at this," she said, scanning the crowd. "When was the last time we all came together like this?" "Probably never," I admitted. "Well," she said, nudging me, "you started it." I shook my head. The lake did. The work began. The old pipe came out first, a rusted 6-inch steel tube clogged with mud and oil. Volunteers cheered when it was finally hoisted free by a small crane. The hollow ring it made as it hit the flatbed truck sounded like closure. Next came the planting. Rowan handed out trays of young cattails, sedges, and arrowhead lilies. These species are native to this watershed, she explained. They'll hold the soil and rebuild the ecosystem from the roots up. I knelt beside the waterline, digging small holes, pressing each plant into the moist soil. The smell was earthy, rich alive, the opposite of the chemical stench that had filled this place just months earlier. Across the bank, I saw Jorge teaching his son how to plant. The Crawfords, an elderly couple who'd once stayed silent during every HOA meeting, were hauling trash bags of debris. Teenagers were painting signs that read, "Protect the lake, it protects us." Even the kids had gotten involved. They decorated wooden stakes with drawings of fish and dragonflies, then stuck them in the ground near the new plants. At one point, Dana brought me a drink. "You okay?" she asked softly. I looked around the laughter, the chatter, the gentle sound of shovels in wet soil. "Yeah," I said, "for the first time in a long while." She smiled. "You earned it." "No," I said. "We all did." By noon, the southern bank looked transformed, not perfect, but reborn. Gone were the trenches and scars. In their place were neat rows of green shoots reaching toward the sunlight. Rowan gathered everyone together for a group photo. "All right, Cedar Crest on 3 say restoration." "Restoration," we shouted, the sound echoing across the water. For a moment, I could almost hear the lake respond. A few days later, the county sent an update, Environmental Progress Report. Lake Marigold. Water quality, improving, oxygen levels rising, nitrogen contamination decreasing, wildlife activity returning. They even included photos, tadpoles, wriggling in the shallows, herons stalking the banks again, and patches of algae slowly breaking apart. When I opened the report, I found myself smiling. It felt strange, that kind of joy, not loud, not triumphant, just steady, like the lake itself. Of course, not everyone was celebrating. Hannah Wright's lawyer filed an appeal claiming the HOA board had been misled by third-party contractors. But the judge dismissed it within a week. Marjorie Finn took a plea deal agreeing to pay restitution and testify against the contractor's company Evergreen Outdoors, which was now under investigation for multiple unlicensed projects. And Alan Pike, he moved away. No one said where. The silence they left behind was healing. By midsummer, something incredible happened. Water reached the base of my old dock again. It wasn't as deep as before, but it shimmered, real moving water, reflecting sunlight like silver glass. That evening, I brought Scout down to the shore. He sniffed the airtail, wagging furiously, then waded right in without hesitation. The ripples spread wide, glinting in the fading light. "You remember this, huh?" I said. He barked once, splashing happily. Across the lake, I could see lanterns flickering, neighbors setting up for what they'd called the lake reopening picnic. Long tables, folding chairs, coolers of food. Music drifted faintly through the trees, someone strumming a guitar, off-key but earnest. When I arrived, people greeted me with smiles. Kids ran barefoot through the grass, chasing each other with glow sticks. Dana waved me over to a table filled with sandwiches and lemonade. "You made it," she said. "Wouldn't miss it." She gestured toward the horizon where the sun dipped low, painting the water gold. "You realize this is history, right?" I nodded slowly. "Feels like it." Then, without warning, someone called out, "Speech, speech." The crowd turned toward me. I froze, hands still sticky with lemonade. "I'm not much for speeches," I began, and laughter broke the tension. "But I'll say this lake didn't die because of nature. It died because people stopped paying attention. We let convenience and control drown out care. But you all brought it back. Not a government agency, not a corporation. You." I paused, looking around the faces lit by lanterns, the kids laughing, the quiet lapping of water against the shore. "So maybe the real restoration isn't just the lake," I said. "Maybe it's us." For a second, there was silence. Then applause erupted, loud and warm and real. Dana raised her cup. "To Lake Marigold and to Ryan Perez," I shook my head, smiling. "To Lake Marigold," I corrected. We drank, laughed, and for the first time in years, the reflection of the water looked like home again. As the night deepened, I sat on my rebuilt cedar bench, Scout curled beside me. Fireflies danced over the reeds, their light glimmering like tiny lanterns. From somewhere behind me, Dana's voice drifted through the night air. "Hey Ryan, yeah, do you ever think about what comes next?" I looked at the water, calm, alive, whispering secrets to the wind. "I think about protecting what we've fixed, and teaching the next people not to break it again." She smiled softly. "That's a good answer." I turned back to the lake, watching the moon climb high, its reflection stretching across the water like forgiveness. We'd lost so much. But somehow, against all odds, the lake and the community had remembered how to breathe again. By autumn, the lake no longer looked wounded. It shimmered. The reeds were tall again, bending gently in the breeze like green flags of victory. The frogs had returned in chorus, and the herons, elegant, slow-moving, waded along the shallows at sunrise. The smell of rot had vanished, replaced by wet earth and life. The town's energy had changed too. Cedar Crest wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a community again, something that word had once meant before the HOA twisted it into bureaucracy and threats. Now, people actually talked. Neighbors shared tools, not lawsuits. They waved from driveways. You could feel trust sprouting from the same soil where resentment once grew. One afternoon in late September, I got a letter in the mail, thick cream-colored paper, the kind that still meant something. The return address, State Environmental Office, Department of Restoration. Inside was a single page that read, Official Notice of Ecological Recovery Lake. Marigold has reached 93% restoration of its pre-drainage water volume. The department commends the residents of Cedar Crest for exemplary community cooperation and stewardship. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, was a personal note, Ryan. You didn't just restore a lake, you restored faith in what people can do together. Rowan, I set the letter down, exhaled slowly, and realized my hands were trembling. After months of tension and anger, this small sentence you restored, faith hit harder than any verdict or fine. Scout Older now patted over and rested his chin on my boot. I reached down and scratched behind his ear. Guess we did okay, huh? He thumped his tail twice against the porch. Agreement. A week later, the new HOA election took place, though calling it HOA felt strange now. The interim board had renamed it Cedar Crest Community Council, a subtle change but symbolic. The word association had become poison. Community felt alive. Dana ran for chairperson, and she won by a landslide. Her first motion at the new council meeting was to abolish the old fine structure entirely. If someone's grass grows too high, maybe ask if their mower's broken before mailing them a threat, she said, and the crowd laughed. Her second motion passed unanimously. The southern dock would be renamed Perez Landing. I tried to object. That's not necessary, I said. It wasn't just me, but Dana smiled. It's not about ego, Ryan. It's about remembering, because people forget too easily what happens when they stop listening. The dedication ceremony was simple. No speeches from politicians, no news vans this time. Just families, children, and the hum of dragonflies. They unveiled a small wooden sign carved by a local craftsman, Perez Landing. We protect what we love or we lose it. It was the line my late wife used to say, words I'd carved quietly into the backrest of the first cedar bench years ago. Seeing them now engraved for everyone to read made something tighten in my chest. After the unveiling, people lingered, laughing, sharing food, taking photos. Kids dangled their feet off the dock. An older couple brought a fishing pole and cast into the shallow water, even though everyone knew there weren't many fish yet. It wasn't about catching anything. It was about believing something could grow there again. As the crowd thinned, Rowan approached. She wasn't wearing her state vest anymore, just jeans and a gray shirt that said "Stewardship starts here." "I thought you'd moved on to other cases," I said. "I did," she replied. "But some places don't leave you behind." She looked out over the water. "You know, this case changed more than you think. The state legislature's drafting a bill right now. It'll limit HOA authority over shared natural resources. They're calling it the Marigold Act." I blinked. "Seriously," she nodded. "Your testimony started it. You might have saved a lot more than one lake." For a while we just stood there listening to the gentle splash of water against the pier. Then she added quietly, "You did the hard part. You stood up when everyone else was scared." "I was scared too," I said. Rowan smiled. "That's what makes it matter." In the months that followed, the restoration project became something of a model for the entire county. Other neighborhoods called asking how Cedar Crest had done it. Dana Ever, the organizer, started a small nonprofit, Friends of Marigold, to help communities resist HOA overreach and protect shared land. I helped with the technical side, drafting templates for environmental monitoring, teaching volunteers how to measure runoff properly. It felt strange to go from being the problem resident to the guy they called for advice. But that's how redemption works, I guess. Slow, earned, quiet. Then one morning in December, I woke to the sound of laughter outside my window. Kids were shouting near the dock. I stepped out, coffee in hand, and what I saw nearly made me spill it. Fish, actual silver flashes of life, darted near the surface, chasing each other under the thin winter sunlight. A small boy held up his hands, dripping wet, yelling, "I saw one, I saw one." I laughed out loud. After everything, the fights, the fines, the courtroom battles, the lake had answered in the only language that mattered: life. Scout barked once, wagging his tail as if he understood. "Yeah," I whispered, smiling. "It's back." By the following spring, Lake Marigold looked almost like it had before Hannah's pipe, maybe even better. The water sat high again, reflecting the blue sky like polished glass. Wildflowers painted the banks yellow and purple. The new pier stretched out gracefully, and near its base stood a bronze plaque donated by the county, in recognition of the citizens of Cedar Crest who proved that accountability begins at home. Every time I passed it, I thought of that first morning when Scout had growled at the receding shoreline, and I'd seen the mud for the first time. I'd told myself then that something was wrong, that the world couldn't stay silent forever. And it hadn't. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it seeps quietly back through the cracks, like water finding its level again. That summer, the community held the first Marigold Festival. It wasn't fancy, just food stalls, a few bands, games for kids. Dana had managed to get a local brewery to sponsor it, and someone even printed shirts that said "Keep it flowing." I wore mine proudly. In the evening as the sun set, I sat by the water with Dana and Rowan. The glow across the surface was golden, soft, alive. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd just stayed quiet?" Dana asked. "Every day," I said honestly. And then I remind myself silence would have killed it faster than the pipe ever did. Rowan nodded. "It always does." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the music drift over the water, mingling with the frogs' low croaks and the soft laughter of families who'd once been divided. When the fireworks started, small local ones, but bright their reflections, rippled across the lake. Scout jumped at the sound, then wagged his tail again, older but unshaken. That night when the crowd was gone, I stayed behind on the dock. The moon hung high, its reflection steady and whole. I thought about Hannah Wright, whether she ever felt remorse, or if she still believed she'd been right. I'd probably never know. But as I looked across the water, I realized it didn't matter anymore. The lake didn't need revenge. It had something better: renewal. And maybe that was the real victory, not punishment, but peace. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's not a gavel hitting wood or a headline going viral. Sometimes it's just the sound of water returning where it belongs, slow, patient, inevitable. This fight taught me that nature, like truth, can be buried, drained, or silenced for a while, but never forever. Because both have a way of finding their level again, of balancing what arrogance tries to tilt. To anyone listening, if you see something being taken from the place you call home, whether it's water, land, or dignity, speak, even if your voice shakes, especially if it shakes. Because silence is what lets rot spread, but courage, even quiet courage, is what brings the water back. So if you're watching this, drop a comment below. Where are you from, and what's one thing in your town you'd protect no matter what? And remember to subscribe for more true stories of resilience, revenge, and redemption, because every ripple starts with one voice.